There is an old adage, one that you might have heard from a grandparent or village wise person, the one that says, you get out what you put in, meaning your efforts are matched to some degree by the results or the output. Now take our nonprofit, Pioneer Knowledge Services, who delivers this cool program that you're listening to right now, takes a bunch of effort that you don't even see. We hope that you obtain value from our efforts to deliver it to your powers of reason. Here is where you come in. You, the listeners. Make our efforts rewarded. Consider donating to keep us moving forward. Visit pioneer-ks.org and click on donate. Forward thinkers, thanks for joining us today. The conversation you're about to step into talks about all the foundational things that an organization needs to consider in order to operate. It will help. Everything you're about to jump into is going to help. It will add value. We'll ask also for you to subscribe and like our show. Your data helps us build better programs and support.
Hey everybody, my name is Kurt Nielsen. I'm from Denmark, in a small village right outside Billund where Lego is, so you understand probably some of my background from that. The most interesting things around me today is actually some of the things I love. They're right behind me. There are my speakers that I'm actually an expert in developing high-end speakers. Who would have thought that? And I absolutely love working with that, but I also love working with people. And actually see people grow and flourish and get to be the best they possibly could. That's what I do professionally, also educate and teach people. I just wrote a book. It's called Liberating Organizations, The Cold Case for Freedom. And you see the little bird of liberation behind me, which is developed by a Ukrainian artist. Credit to her, Sophia. And I could absolutely talk about that for hours, which of course I do if people are willing to pay for it. And doing that next week again, one of the training courses for organizations trying to build places where people can flourish and create value. There's a lot of people that I owe, I guess, who I am and what I do to. One of them has dead and long gone. I never met him. His name was W. Edwards Deming. He died in 1993. He was the one who was responsible for going from the US to Japan and getting that country into the League of Nations and being a very professional and high-quality nation after the devastating war. He's a hero of mine. I use a lot of his stuff also in the book I wrote. Some of the cool things, you see the flag behind me. I do a lot of pro bono work in Ukraine at the moment. There's a people who has a certain sense of urgency, I would say. Not a terribly laid-back attitude as we probably up here in Scandinavia is used to, because we're actually quite comfortable. So that's what I do, and that's my mission right now.
Okay. It's interesting to me that from your background, it seems heavy to tech, and you brought that out in your introduction, that you can build speakers. So you love fidelity, and you understand ohms and amps and all that stuff that creates vibrations that people can hear. What does that have to do with leadership?
I think the first thing is that there's a sense of quality, a sense of also, as you say, fidelity. And that's really why I build these things, is because the music that comes out of them are like being there yourself. There's this connection to the real world and reality and facts and by extension to truth.
Yeah, that's an old term, right? It was pretty popular when I was young, and probably before that. High fidelity was like a sales pitch. That was
right.
The thing that people wanted, even if they didn't know what it meant. So I'm looking up right quick. High fidelity, often shortened to hi-fi, refers to the high-quality reproduction of sound. It aims to recreate the audio experience with utmost accuracy and realism.
Correct.
So if we had to change that over to leadership, that sounds like authenticity, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You have to resonate at a certain level of authenticity in order to be a solid citizen, a solid, whatever that person's role is, don't you think?
Absolutely. And without that, then the answer will be blowing in the wind, because it will just go from wherever the wind goes. And you have to have that and be solidly based in facts. I grew up in the countryside, and boots in the soil were the thing, and not floating in thin air.
Yeah. There's got to be that, and it goes back into that definition of being based in reality.
Yeah.
And that is a good segue, I think, into what your book is about. Can we talk about, give me an overview, kind of left to right. Who's the audience and what do they want to get from this?
Well, the audience is anyone who, for some reason or another, wants to get more value created out of their organization and create a balanced value for all the stakeholders, which really starts with the customer, those you serve, and then there is the employees and those who work there, and then there is the owners, and then there is society at large. Mm-hmm. The audience that we so far have found have been owners, founders of small to medium-sized businesses. They are sufficiently close to the money bin that they care about it. And they're not lost in some huge bureaucracy where position in the hierarchy is more important. Yeah. These are the people we're looking for. And the drive for them is to say, okay, here is an analysis of why we need to work in a different way in today's complex world than we did in the old manufacturing world 50, 60 years ago.
What exactly are some techniques or addresses that you bring forward for those people to try or put in their organization as a behavior?
It starts, again, with fidelity, and in this case, I would switch to transparency. Things have to be transparent. And then there's a few other things. You focus on the value stream. How does value actually get created? You try to get an overview of that. And then you focus on teams. Because when you have to solve complex problems, which many of our problems today are, if not outright chaotic, I don't have the full picture and you don't have the full picture. We only have fragmented knowledge. And therefore we have to get together. And if we sit around the table, a bunch of us, small group, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 or something, perhaps we can see the picture and we can come up with a solution. Value stream and teams, and then we also sometimes refer to the Liberating Organization as a constitutional organization, where there is the rule of law and not the law of the ruler. And the constitution is the set of working agreements, or if it's a company, some of it is reflected in the bylaws, for example. Yeah. And some of them are just simple working agreements between two teams that say, whenever we delegate a job to you, this is how we've agreed that exchange occurs.
So there's rules of engagement, there's rule of order, a lot, it's building a behavior model of what's in and what's out for organizations' schema, I guess. I'll call it a schema to operate from. Don't you think that most organizations get too heavy into building all the schema and not really working the work?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, building the schema is the easy part, right? Oh, we'll sit down, we'll crank out all kinds of processes and regulations, and then nobody looks at it or follows it or enforces it.
And another thing is that most of the schemas being developed are so elaborate and comprehensive that you can't find two people within the organization that have the same understanding of it. I've actually, for the book here, I did 90 interviews with people that we found. These were people I didn't know before. Most of them, actually. Yeah. And a very frequent statement from many of these people that said, oh, I wish our organization would be a bit more outward focused instead of inward.
Meaning what?
That means that why don't we look after our customers and what they actually want, or the people we serve, instead of being too preoccupied with our internal exercises.
Yeah.
So the army is marching around on the ground. They actually are not out there dealing with the world. Yeah.
That is a great way to say that. I love that. I hear what you're saying, that it gets in an old organization I used to work at, it was busy work, right? We're doing busy work to do work.
Yeah.
Versus what's the impact of what we're doing to whoever we're supposed to be serving.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have a term here that's used in our language, in Danish, which is pseudo work.
Pseudo. Yeah.
Fake. Or
pseudo work. Yeah. I'm shuffling papers. I'm putting stuff over here. Yeah, got it.
And then tomorrow I'm putting it back again.
Back where it was. Yeah, exactly.
It looks suspiciously like work. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to guess that some of your current viewpoint of work, organizations, leadership, trust comes from this family farming startup of a co-op. Would you agree with that?
Well, it certainly was quite a big influence. I mean, that was how life was lived. There were these small family farms, and they didn't have much bargaining power or anything. So it was part of what actually pulled the Danish countryside out of poverty, was that these poor fellows ganged together and they started creating dairies and shops and purchasing agreements and slaughterhouses and so forth.
So that takes organization and it takes leadership, but by golly, it has to take a lot of trust.
Yes, it does. Of course, these were independent operators. There was not a boss that told these to get together. But initially, of course, out of need, they got together and they didn't agree. And sometimes there were heavy discussions, but they did find ways forward. They operated with representative decision making, which is another part of what we really discuss in the book, is to replace the top-down power-based hierarchy with representative decision-making, where people give a certain authority to delegates that they trust.
Right.
But again, trust has to be there, otherwise it doesn't work. In this world, there is really only two ways of operating. Either you trust or you control.
I want to make sure the listener hears this, because you're talking about basically dealing with these independents, which on paper are competitors.
Yeah.
They're competing in the business space, and you have to convert that mindset to say, well, there's a different way we could do this if we got together. So I looked up Merriam-Webster's definition of cooperative: an enterprise or organization owned by and or operated for the benefit of those using its services.
Yeah.
And some of the services that you just mentioned was being able to bargain better. It's almost like a union, isn't it? I mean, you're like representing a bunch more people instead of just one organization.
That is one thing, but they also actually did create businesses like dairies, for example. My dad was involved in and foundational in creating actually quite a large one. They together were underwriting a loan for building this building and buying this machinery, which none of them could have had on their own.
And also, it serves the region. It serves the area that these people are in.
Yeah.
You're building commerce. You're building the tools of commerce for them.
Yeah, and you are raising your income level, because instead of setting the raw material, raw milk, for example, you now sell refined cheese and butter and what have you, which of course carries a higher value and keeps the business in that local community.
So why can't we get a government using that model?
I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot with human nature. But actually, one of the things I quote in my book is the preamble to the Swiss Constitution. And if you look at Switzerland, they're probably one of the closest to that in the way that the government operate there. And there's also another thing, is that the government in Switzerland, which is approximately the same size as Denmark, there's only 1/3 of the members in the government.
What does that mean?
There's not that overhead. I mean, you don't have that many ministers.
All right, so it's a little smaller.
But the trust part is just so important. Also, in all other aspects. So that's part of why we came out with the book also, is to, here are some tools that you can help develop trust. Some of it, of course, is very personal, but some of it is also to have structures that support it.
Right.
One of the people I'm inspired by, Dave Snowden, who talks about complexity. He says, if you want people to change behavior, sometimes you have to give them the tools that allow them to change. Yeah, so trust. An example is one of the most effective markets known to mankind is the diamond market in New York City. It happens to be run by Orthodox Jews mostly, but they do trust each other. If I say to Edwin, I'm going to buy for $1 million diamonds from you, then you don't need a contract, because that will happen tomorrow if I said so.
That's a very tight-knit organizational structure with those kind of expectations. And I can't imagine it's easy to get into sideways.
No, that's probably correct. But the thing is, just to think about, I mean, if we in our organizations, inter-country relations, if we can raise the trust level, you know what? Then our transaction costs and our monitoring costs, they drop.
There's some transparency there that wasn't there before.
Yes.
That has to be built over time. It doesn't just happen.
No, trust is a hard thing to build and easy to lose.
Yes. So I'm looking at the Swiss preamble to the Constitution, because I wanted to hear it myself. In the name of Almighty God, the Swiss people in the cantons I don't know what cantons are.
They're like small states.
Mindful of their responsibility towards creation, resolved to renew their alliance so as to strengthen liberty, democracy, independence, and peace in a spirit of solidarity and openness towards the world. Determined to live together with mutual consideration and respect for their diversity, conscious of their common achievements and their responsibility towards future generations, and in the knowledge that only those who use their freedom remain free, and that the strength of a people is measured by the well-being of its weakest members. That's a whole lot right there.
It is.
Oof.
It is. There is a lot in there, yeah. I didn't know it before I started researching these things about constitution as such.
Yeah.
And talking about the constitutional organization, where you define that and you agree on it. And when people enter, they commit to it.
Right. Well, it becomes the operating ethos and values of the organization. And if you're not on board with that, that's the goodness of having a good onboarding program.
Yeah.
That you can give them the sheet music and say, hey, this is what you're joining here. If it's not what you're not jiving with that, then the door's right there.
In our company, Agile Lean House, we actually used that in the sense of we had a competency matrix and a value matrix describing the competencies we were looking for with new hires. And so we listed all of those, and when we asked them to assess themselves and say, so what do I bring to the table? Do I have this? I'm an expert here. Can I do it? Or would I like to learn it? Or what is it? Right? We also had a value matrix and said, we have these values here, and we would like to know if you could subscribe. We would also like if you bring some to the table, and values can be, I really want this, or I really don't want that. Okay, so we did that before we even called people to interview. We asked them to answer those things.
Okay.
And it actually, we've given it to other people. It's very effective in screening to get the right people in that.
You know, instead of just having them check the block on what HR says your skills need to be, you're kind of stepping beyond that prescription to look at something that's not really tangible and try to observe what's congruent with them with the questions you're asking, right? Because those are going to be a bigger tell than the CV or the resume.
But they're both important. But if you talk about you need to trust people, you need to give them more authority because they need to be more independent operating, not just do what they're told. David Marquette, U.S. submarine captain, he talks about intent-based leadership. And he says whenever you want to give people authority, they need to have competence. Well, as obvious, he says, on a nuclear submarine, you don't want incompetent people walking around pushing buttons. You need to have clarity. That means you need to know where we're going. So when you make a decision, you can sort of vector it in the right direction. And then the last thing, which we have emphasized a lot, is you need to trust in people's character. Well, if you give people authority, you need to be able to trust that they will be able to make...
That they've got a good head on their shoulders and their heart's in the right place.
Yeah, but they need to have the character so that they can make decisions for the common good and not just for their own good.
Not for selfish reasons. A Forbes article from January of 2019 called 8 Ways to Lead Employees with Intent-Based Leadership.
Yeah.
And what do you think is number one? Become a better communicator.
Yeah.
And I think communications in and of itself is overlooked a lot in organizational behavior because they don't seem to spend a whole lot of resources in building a knowledge base, if you will, a common operational framework that everybody is aware of. We use this word for that. Very distinct and straightforward communications styles.
Right.
How do you build better communications that gains more trust?
Well, first of all, as you said, you've got to define your vocabulary. It's not enough just to write it in some sort of personnel handbook. It needs to be lived and communicated day by day and reminded, because the finer things, you know how it is with language. There are certain things you could say to me with your American background, and I say, what's he talking about here? But it has a meaning to you. And so we need to communicate. That's the first thing. Then we need a commitment to radical transparency. Retired General Stanley McChrystal, he was sent to Iraq 20 years ago and discovered that he couldn't cope with the Al-Qaeda, with the hierarchical structure, because they were just moving so much faster. So he came up with this other model. He said the first thing we needed was radical transparency. And not that stuff that the CIA always kept hammering. This is on a need-to-know basis, and you don't need to know.
Mm-hmm.
We needed radical transparency, and then push authority as far out as you can find someone who can carry it.
Okay.
That required him to change his behavior from being what he called the chess master, moving the pieces around, to becoming the gardener who prepared the soil for this to grow. That was pretty hard on a 50-year-old four-star general, he said.
Old dogs, new tricks. Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
I am trying to get a definition of radical transparency because it sounds pretty cool. I like the idea, and I'm not aware of that.
I don't think there is a very precise definition of it apart from the fact in context. And I understand that there are situations in companies and organizations where you can't have complete transparency.
It's not for everybody. Yeah, that's
but
for sure.
For the main part, you should probably go a bit farther than you normally would be comfortable with, and actually let people who work in the organization see the transparency, see where you're going.
You're also saying to give them agency.
Yeah.
With my background with the U.S. Army, you get to have battle command, which meant when the stuff's flying, you make decisions as best you can where you're at regardless, and that's the expectation. But in practice, hierarchy is the absolute driver of all things and answers all things and then keeps things separate by design.
Yeah.
Radical transparency, I found a definition on Wikipedia. Radical transparency is a phrase used across fields of governance, politics, software design, and business to describe actions and approaches that radically increase the openness of an organizational process and data.
Yeah.
Its usage was originally understood as an approach or act that uses abundant networked information to access previously confidential all right, so basically you're open up the floodgates of everything we know so everybody can do something.
You can do something and can intervene and say, oh, hey, I caught this detail. That's the name of the game in complex situation, is that I may believe that I have seen everything. Daniel Kahneman, now deceased, says that he talks a lot about cognitive biases, how we consequently think wrong. And but the mother of all biases is, quote, what I see is all there is, end quote. What happens when you open up and let other people see, combined with psychological safety, where they dare to speak up, then you will discover some things. You will discover things you don't like to hear, but you will also stay away from some of the larger disasters that you might step into.
Well, I think it's the only way you're going to get to a problem solved in a complex situation is in order to have that availability of people to share and listen.
Right.
So the other part of that is it's easy to have access to data, information, knowledge. But as you said, the psychological safety, an organization may not want to hear, or a leader, or somebody that's a stick in the mud that is like, and wants to go to fisticuffs every time a problem happens. So there's got to be somebody that's a gatekeeper, or not a gatekeeper, like a policeman that's going to be like, hey, now everybody, play nice. So who does that in an organization? And I'm sure it's in the Constitution, right? If you're going to build an organization, you're going to have to build that piece of curation, policing.
As an English politician recently in an interview, I'm very pleased you asked that question. However, I would rather answer a different one, which he did then. For the benefit of the show, I will answer the question because this is actually part of what this came out of writing the book. I have now for 20 years been a certified Scrum trainer, and Scrum is a way of project management and getting typically development work, product development work done. That's where it started, and it's really started in software, but it applies to other domains as well. There is a role called the Scrum Master.
Yes.
And legend has it that it actually was someone who said, well, what was he actually doing? He's helping the boys that survive out in the wild. And oh, so it's like the Boy Scouts, really. What's that called? Well, that's a Scout Master. Well, then this must be a Scrum Master. So the Scrum Master has that role, but the Scrum Master is like a coach for the team, and he's the one who will stop you if you get off the rails and say, no, we agreed to do it this way. And there's an interesting line of, I would say, cause and effect almost, going back to what we started talking about with the co-op, with the assembly of free men deciding something together. If we go back Nordic area or North Germanic areas, really. Back in the old days, 1,000 years ago, there were not a central kingdom. There were free men owning estate. I mean, it wasn't a perfect democracy by no means. They were there and they met, and where they met was called a thing. In Iceland, the parliament is still called the Alþingi. Thing was also the place where you met and made decisions.
Are you saying Thing?
Yeah, but it's typically spelled with that funny Icelandic letter. In Danish, it's just Ting. The point of making here is there is a tradition for decision making. Decision making can happen without the hierarchy of a monarchy, etc., and people can thrive. But what they did there was that they had such a person that you are saying who's looking after this. In English, he's called the law speaker, or in Old Norse, lagman. And what he did, he was just an old wise guy, and he knew the law by heart. So whenever people got a little bit out of line, he would raise his voice and say, "Hey, boys and girls, we actually decided so and so and so. So this is what it is."
But see, and the only way that works is if the people respect that position.
Of course.
Yeah.
There has to be the common constitution that this is how we do things.
This is how we do it.
These are the rules of the chess game, and we're not playing poker here. We're playing chess now or something. So you can't mix those two.
I want to read this. So Britannica has Thing under Scandinavian Political Assembly.
Yeah.
Thing, in medieval Scandinavia, the local, provincial, and in Iceland, national assemblies of free men that form the fundamental unit of government and law.
Yeah.
And like you said, meeting at fixed intervals, the Thing, in which democratic practices were influenced by male heads of households, legislated at all levels, elected royal nominees, and settled all legal questions.
Yeah.
But it's different than the English version of kings and fiefdoms and all that kind of stuff. Well, I don't know, but it's pretty interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I did not know this.
There's an interesting connection that I have found now.
Okay.
Is the same thing existed in Ukraine. And it also existed in the Cossack societies up into 1500s, 1600s. That is why these guys are fiercely independent.
Right, because they've got thousands of years under their belt of how we do things.
Yes.
Versus a young country like the United States, which is pretty juvenile in that regard, of having a history like that where they grew up with things.
One final thing which I wanted to add to that discussion about Thing, because it has a bearing on also the organizations. Up in Norway, between Bergen and Trondheim on the west coast, there is this place called the Gula Thing, which is a historical site, and it's been there since 800 or something. But there are written records from that. So we actually know something about the laws that were there at the time. And those laws are framed in different language. It is not like you should not, you must not do, you cannot do, or you should do. It is, the words are mutual commitments. We, the people of such and such an entity, have agreed today that no man shall appropriate another man's horse.
Whoa.
So they are commitments. That's what the Constitution is. It is a mutual commitment.
Yes.
And that's why in an organization, when people join, we expect them actually to commit to...
Right. All the concepts and everything. That is so powerful. Thanks for sharing all of this. I actually think... It's amazing to me because you're talking about language, communication, trusting a system, building a community all in one breath, and organized enough and sophisticated enough to operate it, I'm assuming efficiently, maybe not efficiently, but it operated and worked.
Again, in complexity, we call these enabling constraints. They should not be so tight and so rigid and so many that they kill all the spirit of innovation, but there are enabling constraints which are the outer guardrails of how we do things. But flexible enough that people can operate and still be individuals inside.
The word that comes to mind is organic.
Yeah.
It's an organism. It has certain barriers and constraints, as you say, but there's still growth potential that's unlimited.
Yeah, and there's development potential. Again, Dave Snowden says, in complexity, we are looking for the evolutionary potential in the present. And that takes individual operators to discover those evolutionary potentials.
Yes.
It cannot be centrally forced.
Or dictated.
No, right, yeah.
inspiration. If everybody had inspiration, then everything would be done.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. So where can we find this book? How do people get your book?
Well, first of all, right now we have it available on a web shop, and you can find it on liberatingorg.com. Also offer people an electronic copy in a very simplistic form of way if they will donate an amount to Ukraine.
Got it.
We're using it in Ukraine to train clusters of business, not exactly a co-op, but it's similar. And we're also going to teach it on a program in the master's program on Kiev National Economic University next semester, a full class in this, using the material translated to Ukraine.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it will help them. That's the first thing, really.
Sure. I see authors that generate content in texts and books, and I don't see them putting it to use like what you're doing. You're taking the text and then running with it to train and educate a whole society, or at least those that want to learn.
Yeah, well, that came out of 20 years of practice. We said we have to pull this together so that other people can take it and run with it and use it.
Well, I wish you well on that whole journey, but before we roll out of here, what's your definition of knowledge management?
I'm not sure I have one that is very useful. I think there is knowledge that you can write down and document, and you can look up and you can search and so on. And then there's the knowledge that is just inside people, and they know how to do things, but they might not even be able to express what they know, but you can watch them. In the old days, I worked as a software engineer as well. And like, for example, advertising in big newspapers. We were into Los Angeles time. We had the Orange County Register as a client. And so how do you do your advertising? We don't know. Nellie knows. Go and sit by Nellie and watch her. And Nellie couldn't tell us, but we could observe what she did. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
That's another kind of knowledge. And that's the only way you can get hold of that kind.
Observation. Tacit knowledge is hard to transfer, for sure. Well, thank you very much for your time and your expertise and your willingness to be involved. I wish you all the best.
Yeah, you too. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you for joining this extraordinary journey, and we hope the experiences gained add value to you and yours. See you next time at Because You Need to Know. If you'd like to contact us, please email byntk@pioneer-ks.org or find us on LinkedIn.